Judith, thank you very, very much for those warm words. Thank you for your thoughtful remarks. Thank you on behalf of all of us here and all of those around the world who will ultimately benefit for Rockefeller's sponsorship of this very important work. Thank you, Victor, for your leadership at the National Academy of Medicine in convening this very important commission. It is characteristic of everything you do to choose an important problem and then cause what's true to be said in a clear, vigorous, and unflinching way. And we're all indebted to Peter Sands and his fellow commissioners for what I think is a very, very important report. Not entirely clear on why I have been invited to speak. I am neither a physician nor a medical or public health expert, nor a person whose own life has been directly touched by epidemic or pandemic. But I am a person who has been concerned for many years now, going back to the World Bank's World Development Report in 1993 on global health, which I was privileged to oversee, with questions relating to the global health architecture and the global system. And I am convinced, after reading this report, after the study of the question that was contained in the Lancet Commission report that Dean Jameson and I co-chaired a couple of years ago, that of all the issues before us, pandemic and epidemic is the issue with the highest ratio of global seriousness to policy attention. That relative to its significance for humanity, there is no issue that gets less attention. To put the comparison in a direct way, I believe, for reasons I'll amplify on in just a moment, that if you calculate the expected cost to humanity over the next century from epidemics and pandemics on our current global path, it is in the same broad range, to within a factor of 2 or 3, as the expected cost from global climate change. And I am struck by how little attention this issue receives relative to the issue of global climate change. To be absolutely clear, global climate change deserves all the attention that it receives and more, but I believe that global health risks deserve much more attention than they are receiving. Start with this. The numbers are all very uncertain and no one can make judgments exactly. But the 1918 flu, if it happened today, would kill in the range of 6,000 times as many people as Ebola did. That is not an inconceivable event. There are those who believe the annual probability of such an event are 1 to 2%. There are those who believe that that figure is substantially too high and that it is 0.3% to 0.6%. And I would not presume to try to sort that statistical conflict out. There isn't enough data to really know. What we do know is that even the low end of that range represents an immense risk given the potential seriousness of the consequences in a world that is far more interconnected than the world of 1918 was. The report very thoughtfully estimates the economic damage from pandemics at $60 billion a year, and makes the very powerful point that spending $4.5 billion a year to mitigate a $60 billion a year problem is almost certainly a very good investment. I believe that $60 billion calculation is, in a certain conceptual sense, only the tip of an iceberg. And I believe that proper analysis, increasingly in the health area, will need to recognize the direct economic valuation that people put on risk or on risk mitigation. Permit me a brief indulgence in economic theory. We observe that if you want to get people to take a risky job where the mortality, the risk in the risky job is 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 % higher than the risk in a safe job, you have to pay them a fair amount of money to get them to be willing to take that risk. Or in other words, we all value risk mitigation. And you can attempt to measure the monetary value of risk mitigation by looking at the choices people make between safe and risky jobs, between safe and unsafe cars. You can do that, and then you can ask the question, when we improve health systems and thereby reduce mortality risks, what is that risk reduction worth to people? That's an important theme of the Lancet Commission report. And for those who are interested in the details, I would refer you to that report. What I would just describe is that if you take the estimates that I referred to a moment ago of the risks of flu recurrence, and you apply that methodology, you get an estimated annual cost, not the cost the year the pandemic comes, but the estimated expected cost, the probability of the pandemic coming relative to the cost of about 1% of global GDP. That is an immense number. That will before long be $1 trillion a year. And of course, there are also the costs associated with the more likely but less severe kinds of events that we have seen a number of times. Lesser flu epidemics, SARS, AIDS, possible problems that would come out of the development of antibiotic resistance bacteria. So the consequences and risks here are immense. And frankly, this has not been on the A list of global problems in the way that nuclear proliferation or terrorism or global climate change has been. But I think there is a serious case to be made that in terms of the risks for ordinary citizens in all of our countries, in the developing and the industrial world, that those risks are as large going forward. And I think the first great contribution of this report is highlighting the magnitude of the issue. But it does much more. And I just want to offer my 3 primary takeaways from reading and considering the report. Eisenhower famously said that plans always have to be discarded at the moment of battle, but it is nonetheless indispensable to plan. And in the same way, while none of us can foresee what the next emergency will look like and the form that it will take, I believe the kind of prior planning that is embedded in this report is of immense importance. 3 aspects stand out. First, you cannot isolate and silo pandemic preparation. With the world's greatest international pre-planned response and ineffective infrastructures on the ground in countries where 1/3 of humanity lives, we will not mount a satisfactory solution to this problem. It is a famous feature of government and political systems that the urgent crowds out the profoundly important. And so in societies with pressing needs and insufficient budgets, the establishment of basic infrastructures that can be mobilized at a moment of emergency is almost certainly neglected. If that issue is not addressed at the national level around the world, nothing else we do with science, with international efforts, will be sufficient to respond to the problem. It is observed in business that what you count counts. And there's a kind of corollary in international life that what you measure and report on matters. Satisfactory approaches to monitoring national efforts, naming and recognizing those who mount strong efforts, and naming and allowing the press to shame those who mount insufficient efforts is, I believe, an indispensable part of building the necessary capacity going forward. Second, we need a stronger and clearer set of international approaches. Part of that goes to the clarification of authorities and responsibilities before the crisis comes, so there is less inspired and spirited improvisation and more reliance on protocols than has been the case in the past. There is no better time than now, when Ebola is clearly in everybody's mind, for that clarification to take place. But the best organization chart, massively under-resourced, does not solve problems in satisfactory ways. I attempted to inquire, in preparing my remarks this morning, what seemed to me to be a reasonable question, which was, what is the WHO's annual budget for pandemic preparation? That turned out to lead to a great deal of discussion of what constituted pandemic preparation and how one defined the budget, and a whole set of definitional issues that are very important. So I cannot report a rigorous conclusion. I can report an impression. And the impression is this. I asked Peter Sands, when he was CEO of the Standard Chartered Bank, how large an investment it would have to be before board approval was necessary. The answer was $500 million. Before you had to ask the Standard Chartered Board for approval if you were the Standard Chartered Bank. And it would be similar in any major financial institution. That is an order of magnitude greater than the range that people discuss. An order of magnitude, to remind you, means a factor of 10. Than the range that people discuss for what the current annual budget is at the WHO. It is inconceivable that when we are spending an amount that is a small fraction of what the Rockefeller Foundation spends on global health at the central international institution for global health, that we are spending at the right level. More adequate financing on a regular basis and more adequate contingent financing for when the crisis comes, including where possible, by using private sector capital market mechanisms, seems to me to be a second essential element. Third, science, both ex ante and ex post. This point was brought up, the most powerful way this point was ever brought home to me was when my good friend Barry Bloom, who some of you know, who was dean of Harvard School of Public Health, came and spoke with me about what the School of Public Health did. He asked me if I had been a funder in 1952, which would I prefer to have funded? Scholarships for iron lungs so more people could get access to them, or the research of Salk and Sabin? And in which way did I think my funds would have had a greater impact on mitigating the pain and suffering associated with polio? And he framed the question that way because once the question is asked, the answer is utterly and completely obvious. With respect to vaccines in general, and with respect to the capacity to develop vaccines as rapidly as possible in the wake of an emergency, it is essential that we invest more. This is the quintessential problem for which we cannot rely on the private sector. No one would permit, nor should anyone want, to profit immensely from having the scarce vaccine or antibody at a moment of pandemic. Therefore, the private sector will not be able to capture even a small fraction of the social benefit from a valuable preventive. Moreover, it is the essence of pandemic that it is a nonlinear, exponential phenomenon. And so each case you prevent prevents the chain and slows the spread. A classic example of what economists call an externality. And for that reason as well, the market incentive will be insufficient. And so proper investment in the science here has the prospect of enormous benefit. If we're able to make big steps in the three areas that Peter and his colleagues have identified: science, the international system, national infrastructures. I have always believed, and I think it is especially true in the global health area, that John Kennedy was right when he said man's problems were made by man. It follows that they can be solved by man. This is a vitally important effort, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to be with you this morning. Thank you very much.